Working the night shift at the Blackwood Hotel was usually peaceful. Most of the guests were already checked in and asleep, leaving me with little more to do than some paperwork, the occasional room service request, and a few rounds of the empty halls. That night started off just like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m., greeted by the dimly lit lobby and the faint hum of soft jazz playing from the speakers. I nodded at the security guard, Greg, as I took my place behind the front desk. "Quiet night?" I asked, settling in for my shift. "Yeah, pretty dead. Just the way we like it," Greg replied with a tired smile. He was right. Most nights passed by without incident, the quiet humdrum of the hotel lulling me into a comfortable routine. But that night, something felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was an unease in the air, something subtle and wrong. It was around midnight when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be a guest requesting something simple, like extra towels or a wake-up call. Instead, there was silence on the other end. "Hello?" I said, waiting for a response. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a faint, raspy breathing just on the edge of my hearing. A chill ran down my spine. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice shaky. Still no response, just that eerie breathing. I hung up, trying to shake off the discomfort that crept into my thoughts. It was probably just a prank, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But as the night went on, that uneasy feeling only grew. I did my rounds through the hotel, walking the empty corridors with only the sound of my footsteps for company. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long. Every creak in the floorboards felt too close. And then, just as I was about to head back to the lobby, the phone rang again. I rushed back to the desk, half expecting it to be the same silence. But this time, there was a voice. "I see you," it whispered, barely more than a breath. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just a low chuckle before the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my hands trembling. I scanned the lobby, the shadows now feeling more oppressive, as if they were hiding something, or someone. I picked up the phone again, dialing Greg's number, but before it could ring, the phone rang once more, startling me. It was the same number, but I didn't pick it up. Instead, I grabbed the hotel's master key and hurried to the security office where Greg was stationed. "Greg, something's wrong. I think someone's messing with me," I said as soon as I burst through the door. He looked at me, concerned. "What do you mean?" I explained the phone calls, the voice, and the feeling of being watched. Greg frowned and turned to the security monitors, scanning through the camera feeds. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. Then he paused, leaning closer to one of the screens. "Wait, what the hell is that?" I followed his gaze to one of the monitors showing the hallway near the service entrance. There, just at the edge of the camera's view, was a figure standing in the shadows, barely visible. They were motionless, their face obscured by the darkness. "Who is that?" I whispered, fear tightening in my chest. Greg grabbed his flashlight and stood up. "Stay here. I'm going to check it out." Greg left the office, leaving me alone with the monitors. I watched as he approached the hallway, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The figure was gone. "Greg, be careful," I said into the radio, my eyes glued to the screen. "I don't see anyone here. Might have just been a trick of the light." Greg's voice crackled back, though I could hear the uncertainty in his tone. I tried to calm my nerves, but as I watched Greg move through the hotel, that uneasy feeling only grew. The figure had vanished from the camera, but I couldn't shake the sense that something, or someone, was still there. Suddenly, one of the monitors flickered. The camera feed for the lobby went dark, then another and another, until only static filled the screen. "Greg, the cameras are going out. Something's wrong," I said, panic rising in my voice. "I'm coming back. Stay put," Greg replied, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. I waited, my eyes darting between the few remaining live feeds. But before Greg could reach the security office, the lights in the hotel flickered and then went out entirely, plunging the building into darkness. The only light now was the faint glow from my phone. I could hear Greg moving through the dark, his flashlight beam sweeping the walls as he hurried back. Then the phone rang again. I stared at it, dread washing over me. Slowly, I picked it up, bringing it to my ear. "Why are you hiding?" the voice whispered, closer this time, as if it were right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps as I clutched the phone, trying to keep calm. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Don't turn around," the voice hissed, sending a jolt of terror through me. The phone dropped from my hand, clattering to the floor as I backed against the wall. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, in the darkness, I saw it. A faint movement, a shadow shifting. The figure stepped into the dim light from my phone, revealing a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. He was only a few feet away. "Found you," he whispered, raising a long, glinting knife. I screamed, bolting for the door, but he was faster. I felt a sharp pain as the knife grazed my arm, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran into the hallway, nearly colliding with Greg. "Run!" I yelled, not stopping to explain. Greg saw the terror in my eyes and didn't hesitate. We sprinted through the pitch-black corridors, the stalker's footsteps echoing behind us. We burst into the lobby, frantically searching for an escape. The front doors were locked, the windows barred. There was nowhere to go. "Upstairs to the roof!" Greg shouted, leading the way to the stairwell. We dashed up the stairs, the sound of the stalker's pursuit growing louder with each step. My heart pounded in my ears, fear driving me onward. Finally, we reached the roof access door. Greg shoved it open, and we stumbled out into the cold night air. We were trapped. The only way out was down, a sheer drop to the pavement below. Greg turned to me, his face pale. "We're cornered. What do we do?" Before I could answer, the door slammed open, and the stalker emerged, his knife glinting in the moonlight. "There's nowhere left to run," he said, his voice low and menacing. I backed away, my mind racing. Then, with a sudden burst of resolve, I grabbed a loose piece of metal piping from the rooftop and faced him. "This ends now," I said, my voice trembling but determined. He lunged at me, the knife aimed at my chest. I swung the pipe with all my strength, catching him in the side. He staggered, but before I could strike again, he lashed out, the knife slashing across my leg. I screamed in pain, falling to the ground. The stalker loomed over me, his twisted smile growing wider as he raised the knife for the final blow. But just as he brought it down, Greg tackled him from the side, the two of them tumbling towards the edge of the roof. I scrambled to my feet, rushing to help, but I was too late. With a final, desperate push, Greg sent the stalker over the edge. I heard his scream as he fell, and then silence. I stood there, panting and shaking, staring down at the empty street below. The stalker was gone, his twisted game finally over. Greg limped towards me, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. But as I looked into the darkness below, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. That somewhere out there, in the shadows, he was still watching, still waiting. And I knew, deep down, that the nightmare was far from over. I started working the night shift at the local gas station about 6 months ago. The hours were long, and the place was usually dead quiet after midnight. But the pay was decent, and I didn't mind the solitude. It gave me time to think, to plan my next move in life. The station was a small, dingy building off the highway, surrounded by nothing but dark fields and distant trees. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, casting a sickly yellow glow over everything. There was a small convenience store inside, with rows of snacks, drinks, and the usual items you'd expect at a gas station. My job was simple: keep the place clean, restock the shelves, and man the register for the occasional late-night traveler. Most nights passed without incident. The only company I had was the low hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of cars speeding by on the highway. But something about that night felt different. It was quieter than usual, the air heavier, like a storm was about to break. It was around 2 a.m. when he walked in. The doorbell chimed as the door swung open, and I looked up from my magazine to see a man in a heavy coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace, heading straight for the back of the store where the cold drinks were. Something about him put me on edge. Maybe it was the way he walked, or how he kept his head down, not making eye contact. Or maybe it was just the late hour, and the fact that I was alone in the middle of nowhere. I tried to shake off the unease and went back to my magazine, pretending not to notice him. But I couldn't help glancing up every few seconds, watching as he moved through the aisles. He wasn't grabbing anything, just wandering around, almost as if he was waiting for something. After a few minutes, he finally approached the counter, a soda in one hand and his other hand stuffed deep in his coat pocket. I forced a smile, trying to be polite. "Good evening," I said, ringing up the drink. "That'll be $2.50. He didn't respond. Instead, he just stared at me, his face shadowed under the brim of his cap. The silence stretched on, becoming uncomfortable. I was about to ask if he was okay when he suddenly spoke. "Do you believe in fate?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, and it sent a chill down my spine. I guess," I stammered, unsure of what to say. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected my answer. Then, without warning, he pulled out a gun from his coat and pointed it directly at my face. Panic surged through me. My heart pounded in my chest as I raised my hands instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. The world seemed to narrow down to the cold barrel of the gun and the man's expressionless face behind it. "Listen," I started, my voice trembling. "Take whatever you want. Just, please don't hurt me." The man didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and unreadable. The silence was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. He motioned with the gun, indicating for me to come around the counter. I did as he said, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I run? Should I try to grab the phone and call for help? But the gun was always there, a constant threat that kept me frozen in place. "Lock the door," he ordered, his voice flat. I nodded, slowly walking over to the entrance. My fingers fumbled with the lock, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't get it to turn. But finally, it clicked into place, sealing us both inside the small, dimly lit store. "Now, get on the floor," he commanded. I dropped to my knees, feeling the cold tiles under me. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat dripping down my back despite the chill in the air. The man circled around me, always keeping the gun trained on my head. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He ignored my question, instead kneeling down so he was at eye level with me. His gaze bore into mine, and I could see something unhinged in his eyes, something that terrified me even more than the gun. "This place," he said slowly, his voice almost a growl. "This place was supposed to be mine. Do you know what that means?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. "Of course you don't," he sneered, standing up and pacing around the store. "They promised me everything, money, power, control, but they lied. They gave it all to someone else, to people like you." "I don't know what you're talking about," I pleaded. "I'm just a worker. I don't have anything to do with whatever you're mad about." He stopped pacing and turned to face me again, the gun still aimed at me. "It doesn't matter now," he said coldly. "None of it matters anymore." I could feel my chances slipping away. My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything, to get out of this alive. I noticed the man's focus seemed to waver for just a moment as he stared off into the distance, lost in his own twisted thoughts. Seizing the opportunity, I lunged towards the counter, reaching for the emergency button under the register. My fingers brushed against it, but before I could press it, the man was on me, slamming me to the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I gasped for air as he grabbed me by the collar and pressed the gun against my temple. "You think you can trick me?" he hissed, his breath hot against my ear. "I wasn't—" I started, but he cut me off, pressing the gun harder into my skull. "Shut up!" he snarled. "You're just like the rest of them. Always trying to cheat, always trying to take what's mine." I could feel the cold metal of the gun digging into my skin, and I knew that if I didn't do something now, I wouldn't get another chance. Desperation gave me strength, and I twisted sharply, elbowing him in the ribs. He grunted in pain, loosening his grip just enough for me to scramble away. I bolted for the back door, the only other exit. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst, but I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me, cursing, the sound of his footsteps growing louder. I reached the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the latch. It felt like time had slowed to a crawl, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, I got it open and threw myself outside into the cold night air. I ran, not daring to look back, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted across the empty parking lot. My only thought was to get away, to find help, to survive. I heard the door slam open behind me and the sound of gunfire, a sharp crack that echoed through the night. I felt something whiz past my ear, but I didn't stop. I kept running, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. Finally, I reached the edge of the lot, where the highway met the gravel road leading away from the gas station. I spotted headlights in the distance and ran towards them, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a stop, and I threw myself against the driver's window, yelling for help. The driver, a middle-aged man with a look of shock on his face, rolled down the window. "Please, you have to help me!" I gasped, my voice hoarse. "There's a man with a gun. He's trying to kill me!" Without hesitation, the man unlocked the door, and I jumped in, slamming it shut behind me. He floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the station. As we drove, I glanced back, half expecting to see the man chasing after us, but there was nothing, just the dark, empty road stretching behind us. We drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes before we reached a nearby town. The driver pulled over in front of a police station, and I stumbled out of the car, still in shock. Inside, I told the officers everything, about the man, the gun, the terrifying ordeal. They immediately sent out a patrol car to the gas station, but when they returned, they told me they hadn't found anyone. The man was gone, vanished into the night as if he had never been there. But I knew he was real. I could still feel the cold metal of the gun against my skin, hear his unhinged voice in my ears. And even though they never caught him, I knew he was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. The station was shut down after that, the company deciding it wasn't worth the risk to keep it open. And I never worked another night shift again. I couldn't. The fear still lingered, the memory of that night haunting me whenever I closed my eyes. Because I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter how safe I thought I was, there was someone out there who had seen me, someone who believed that I had taken something from him. And I couldn't shake the feeling that one day he'd come back to finish what he started.